Imagine yourself wandering through the streets of ancient Rome in the year 67 after Christ, when you encounter something that chills you to the bone. The Emperor Nero himself is walking through the Forum accompanied by what seems to be his new wife, a breathtaking young woman adorned with silken jewels. Yet behind them there are whispers because everyone is aware of the dreadful secret that the woman next to the most powerful man on earth was formerly a boy named Sporus. What Nero did to him stands as one of the most disturbing examples of psychological and physical cruelty ever documented. Before we delve into these overlooked tales of endurance and torment, if you enjoy uncovering hidden historical truths, consider pressing the like button and subscribing for more fascinating stories. Also, please share in the comments where you are watching from. I find it amazing how we explore these ancient events together from various corners of the world, united across time and space by our mutual fascination with history. The narrative you are about to hear is not simply another story of Roman extravagance. It reveals how unchecked authority can turn love into obsession, despair into madness, and a person into a living puppet molded to fulfill a single man's warped desire. The name Sporus may be unfamiliar, but his story will linger in your mind long after you hear it. Let us begin with the individual who orchestrated this tragic fate. Nero was not born wicked. In fact, his early rule revealed great potential. When he took the throne at only 16 years old, many Romans felt they were witnessing the beginning of a golden era. He lowered taxes, sponsored public spectacles, and even took part in theatrical performances that entertained ordinary citizens. However, absolute authority has a way of corrupting even the brightest spirits, and by the year 65 AD, something had deeply fractured within the emperor's mind. Perhaps it was the relentless suspicion that everyone around him desired his position. Perhaps it was the loneliness of being the sole individual in an empire of 60 million who could never be contradicted, challenged, or told he was mistaken. Or maybe it was what happened to the one person Nero claimed to love more than life itself. Her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she embodied everything Nero believed he wanted in a woman: breathtakingly beautiful, intellectually sharp enough to match his grandiose self-image, and ambitious enough to share his dreams of everlasting fame. Yet Paula was more than just another attractive figure in the imperial court. She had keen political acumen that could make her a powerful ally or a menacing opponent. By the time Nero first saw Paula, he was already married to Octavia, daughter of the former emperor. Their marriage was cold and loveless, a mere political arrangement. Paula symbolized all that Octavia was not, while Octavia was reserved. While Octavia preferred to stay quiet and modest, Poppaea Sabina was lively and commanding. Where Octavia sought to avoid attention, Paula delighted in being the focal point of everyone's interest. The affair between Nero and Poppaea began as a common Roman scandal, but what initially appeared as infidelity swiftly turned into a far more perilous fixation. Nero was not merely drawn to Paula's physical allure, he was overwhelmed by her in a way that alarmed even his closest advisors. Ancient historians portray Nero's conduct during this time as increasingly unpredictable and possessive. He would erupt into violent fury if any man glanced at Penny for too long. During official events, he placed guards around her constantly, supposedly for her protection, though their real purpose was to watch over her every move. Nero showered Penny with lavish presents that drained the imperial treasury, precious gems from India, silks from China, and fragrances from Arabia. More tellingly, he began altering reality itself to fit his obsession. First, he divorced Octavia, a shocking decision that estranged many of his followers. Then he revealed his plan to wed Penny in a grand imperial ceremony. The wedding was an ostentatious display of extravagance, with Nero sparing no cost to showcase his dedication. Yet even marriage failed to fulfill Nero's desire to completely control Penny. He started isolating her from her relatives and companions, surrounding her with individuals whose positions depended solely on his favor. He commissioned numerous. Not only were portraits and sculptures of her created for public exhibition, but they were also intended for his private rooms, so he could gaze upon her likeness even when they were apart. Ancient accounts reveal that Nero at times would spend countless hours simply observing Poppaea as she carried out her everyday routines. This was not an expression of romantic affection. Rather, it reflected the mindset of someone who had mistaken love for possession. He viewed another human being not as an autonomous individual, but as a beautiful object meant solely for his enjoyment. Poia, on her side, seemed keenly aware of the perilous role she occupied. She was astute enough to understand that her allure and Nero's fixation granted her extraordinary influence, yet wise enough to recognize that such power brought grave dangers. She started to leverage her status to promote her family's ambitions, establishing a circle of allies who would shelter her should Nero's feelings ever falter. However, Papia Sabina had one critical weakness. She was unafraid to confront Nero. Unlike the rest of the imperial court, who had learned to anticipate the emperor's temper, Pola clung to her independence. She would debate with him on matters of policy, critique his artistic efforts, and even ridicule his performances when she found them lacking. The specifics of what transpired on that decisive day in the year 65 after Christ differ depending on which ancient chronicler is followed, yet the result remains unchanged. What began as an ordinary quarrel at home escalated into a tragic conclusion. Some accounts mention Nero returning home late from chariot competitions, while others focus on his involvement in theatrical performances. The emperor lost control in a manner that would haunt him forever. According to Tacitus, the conflict intensified when Papia Sabina dared to criticize Nero's priorities, claiming he valued his public reputation more than his duties as a husband and father. At the time, she was expecting their second child, and perhaps the tension made her less inclined to endure Nero's increasingly erratic conduct. What followed has sparked debate among historians for centuries, but the general agreement is that Nero, overwhelmed by rage, either kicked or struck his pregnant wife with such force that she sustained fatal internal wounds. Some reports describe a single violent blow to her stomach, while others suggest a continuous assault that left her bleeding and unconscious on the marble floor. Picture the moment when Nero realized the gravity of his actions. The man who commanded 30 legions, who could have anyone executed with a mere command, and who was worshipped as a god in the eastern territories, had just destroyed the one person he actually cared for. The woman he had been obsessed with was dying because of his uncontrollable fury. Ancient sources portray the aftermath as one of the most pathetic episodes in imperial history. Nero is said to have collapsed beside Papia Sabina's body, alternating between pleading for her forgiveness and ordering her to survive as if enforcing his imperial dominance. His influence extended even beyond death. He summoned the finest doctors in Rome, offering them great wealth to save her life and threatening severe punishment if they failed. Yet it was already too late. Poia passed away within hours, taking with her the unborn child who could have been Nero's successor. At that moment, something deeply shattered inside the emperor's mind. His grief was not merely emotional devastation, it marked a total departure from reality. Nero's sorrow became infamous. He refused to let her body be burned according to Roman tradition. Instead, he had it embalmed and placed in a tomb far more ornate than those of former emperors. He proclaimed her divine, created a cult to worship her, and spent days speaking to her corpse as if she could hear every word. The imperial court faced an even more dangerous situation. Nobles were expected to join the illusion that Papia Sabina was somehow still alive, mentioning her in the present tense and keeping her favorite seat empty at banquets. Anyone who dared suggest the emperor should move on was immediately banished or worse. It was during this time that Sporus first caught Nero's attention, although the young man had no idea he was stepping into a nightmare. Sporus was likely around 14 or 15 years old, born into slavery within the imperial household, and later freed as a child. He was raised inside the palace walls and educated to perform administrative roles. This background prepared him for the fate that awaited. The status of a freedman within the imperial service was inherently relative. These individuals frequently experienced conditions surpassing those of free-born citizens from lower social ranks, yet this advantage was tied entirely to the favor of the emperor. Freedmen relied completely on the generosity of their former masters, which rendered them utterly vulnerable. They could be raised to positions of significant power, but also discarded, punished, or even executed on a mere whim without any legal protection. What distinguished Sporus in Nero's perception was not his intellect or abilities, but rather his appearance. Numerous ancient accounts concur that the young man bore an extraordinary resemblance to the deceased Papia Sabina, especially in the eyes and finely shaped facial bones. In a society that attributed physical likeness to profound spiritual bonds, this similarity appeared almost otherworldly. The initial encounter between Nero and Sporus after Papia Sabina passing triggered something within the emperor's fractured psyche. Here lay an opportunity to reverse the irreversible and restore what he had lost. The likeness was so profound that Nero might briefly have believed he was witnessing Papia Sabina's spirit inhabiting a new body. Naturally, there was one glaring issue. Sporus was male. However, for a man convinced of his divinity who had spent months communing with a corpse, altering someone's gender seemed a trivial matter. What followed stands as one of history's most deliberate acts of cruelty. Nero did not merely choose to impose change on Sporus. Dressing as a woman, he resolved to make the change permanent. The emperor called upon the finest doctors in Rome and instructed them to carry out surgery on the young man solely to enhance his feminine appearance. This was not merely mutilation, but a deliberate erasure of Sporus's identity as a human being. The operation was perilous, agonizing, and irreversible, often leading to death due to infection or excessive bleeding. Even if Sporus survived, his existence would be altered forever, physically, emotionally, and socially. He would never father children, never form typical relationships, and Roman society would never regard him as fully male. The surgery occurred within the imperial palace in sections specially arranged for this purpose. Medical techniques in antiquity were rudimentary, utilizing simple tools and harsh anesthetics. The ordeal must have been torturous, lasting several hours with a considerable chance of fatality. During the procedure, Sporus would have been restrained by guards as doctors approached with their instruments, fully aware that his cries for mercy would be ignored. Once Sporus entered the long recovery process, spanning weeks or even months, Nero pronounced a decision that stunned even the hardened Roman nobility. He intended to wed the young man in a grand imperial ceremony. Months of preparations followed, consuming vast resources. Sporus received a new name, Papia Sabina, after the deceased empress, and was moved to a private residence where he could be groomed for his new role. Imperial dressmakers and attendants were assigned to ready him for this unprecedented position in the emperor's life. An entire wardrobe was created with great care, designed to enhance his altered physique while concealing any remaining masculine traits. Expert jewelers fashioned pieces just for him, many of which included gems that once belonged to Poeia herself. These items were more than mere decorations. They represented physical connections to the deceased woman and served as reminders of the identity Papia Sabina was compelled to assume. Makeup artists instructed him in the art of softening his features, demonstrating how to use charcoal to enlarge the eyes, apply rouge for a healthy flush, and powder the face to smooth harsh contours. These sessions extended beyond surface beauty, acting as deliberate efforts to erase his original self. Specialists in hairstyling provided guidance in intricate arrangements favored by noble Roman women. His hair was trimmed, curled, and shaped into elaborate designs, often adorned with costly accessories. This routine demanded hours each day, requiring several attendants and heated metal instruments. Perhaps the most wrenching transformations were the lessons in feminine etiquette and demeanor. Papia Sabina was assigned mentors who guided him in walking, sitting, and gesturing with ladylike elegance. He mastered holding his hands delicately, positioning his feet gracefully, managing his attire when seated, and moving smoothly, embodying finesse instead of masculine power. Speech coaches helped alter his vocal delivery, training him to speak with a lighter, more refined tone, and adopt speech patterns typically linked to feminine communication. This proved to be perhaps the toughest part, since vocal habits are deeply embedded and hard to alter consciously. Can you imagine the mental torment involved in this change? Each day, Sporus was compelled to gaze into mirrors that reflected back a stranger wearing his face. Every lesson in feminine conduct was a stark reminder that his own identity was being deliberately erased. Every piece of jewelry that had once belonged to a deceased woman had transformed into a constraint, chaining him to a role he had never chosen. The wedding was planned for the spring of 67 AD, timed to align with religious celebrations that would heighten its ceremonial significance. Nero spared no expense, treating it as a genuine imperial wedding worthy of the greatest emperor in Roman history. The event took place in the palace's grandest hall, adorned with imported blossoms and lit by thousands of oil lamps. Musicians performed traditional marriage songs, while servants served the finest wines and delicacies. To outsiders who were unaware of the full context, it might have appeared as an ordinary imperial wedding, but those in the know realized they were witnessing something entirely unprecedented and unsettling. The most powerful man on earth was publicly marrying a surgically altered teenage boy disguised as his deceased wife. The ceremony followed every customary Roman ritual, including exchanging vows, joining hands, sharing sacred bread, and signing legal papers, making it a complete and official event. A union official and the guests fulfilled their roles with skilled acting, offering congratulations and lavish presents while showing appropriate happiness. Yet the atmosphere must have been heavy with barely hidden shock, fascination, and anxious tension that arises from being involved in something deeply wrong. After the wedding, Nero treated Sporus exactly as he would a legitimate empress. The young man was given his own household staff and living quarters inside the palace grounds, along with an income from the imperial treasury. He was provided with a personal litter for travel, horses for riding, and a retinue of attendants. However, this apparent grandeur came at a horrendous cost: the total erasure of his original identity and the relentless enactment of a mentally crushing role. Sporus was expected to accompany Nero to public events, sit beside him during official dinners, and play the devoted wife in every social interaction. This was not mere pretense. Nero genuinely appeared to believe he had brought Poeia back to life. He would address Sporus by the name of his late wife, speak fondly of shared memories that never actually occurred, and demand replies that sustained the elaborate fiction. For Sporus, each day became a high-risk act where a single mistake could mean death. He needed to remember not only how to appear and behave like a woman, but also how to respond as if he truly were Nero's beloved wife. Whenever Nero mentioned events from his former marriage, Sporus had to react as though he really had lived those moments. Ancient sources recall Sporus personally. They portray him as becoming increasingly adept at deception, developing what seemed like a supernatural talent for anticipating Nero's moods and reacting accordingly. Yet these accounts also reveal that over time he grew more distant and melancholic, although he continued flawlessly performing his role in public. The psychological pressure must have been unimaginable. Each morning Sporus awoke in chambers adorned to evoke a deceased woman he never knew. His reflection in every mirror no longer resembled his original self. Every conversation demanded that he pretend to be another person, possessing memories and experiences that were not truly his own. For more than 2 years Sporus endured this strange existence, but the ordeal intensified when Nero resolved to tour Greece. The emperor fancied himself an artist and was keen to compete in Greek festivals, where he believed his abilities would gain proper admiration. Naturally, Sporus accompanied him, displayed to foreign dignitaries as the Empress of Rome. Picture Greek aristocrats struggling to comprehend their conqueror traveling with a teenage boy dressed as a woman, insisting that everyone accept this clear illusion as authentic. However, by the year 68 AD, Nero's excesses had finally alienated the Roman elite. Rebellions erupted throughout the empire, led by governors weary of the emperor's erratic conduct and neglect of duties. The Praetorian Guard declared their opposition to Nero's rule. The continued reign ended with the Senate denouncing him as a traitor when Nero eventually escaped Rome, accompanied by a small group of loyalists. Papia Sabina was among them. Even facing death, the ruler refused to abandon his living reminder of Poeia. They sought refuge in a villa just outside the city, awaiting either salvation or capture. During this time, Nero vacillated between grandiose plans to flee and dramatic preparations for ending his own life. When news arrived that his foes were closing in, Nero ultimately chose death over imprisonment. However, his suicide left Papia Sabina extremely exposed as one of the most conspicuous symbols of Nero's leadership. This made her both a valuable prize and a perilous burden for whoever gained control next. What followed was perhaps even more heartbreaking. Papia Sabina was turned into a political pawn, passed around like prized property from one influential man to another. Initially claimed by Cneius Sabinus, then by and later by Vitellius, each handled her similarly to how Nero had. She was kept dressed as a woman and referred to by Poeia's name. Under Vitellius, Papia Sabina nightmare reached its darkest point. The new ruler resolved to exploit her for public spectacle in the Colosseum, specifically reenacting mythological scenes filled with violence and degradation. For Papia Sabina, this experience was the ultimate humiliation, being publicly shamed for the entertainment of thousands. Rather than endure this final disgrace, Papia Sabina made the only choice that remained hers after so many years. She took her own life. Sporus likely died from poison sometime around 69 AD. He was probably no older than 20 years at the time of his death. At last, Sporus escaped the grotesque spectacle that had consumed his entire existence. His life turned into a warning about the perils of unchecked authority and the devastating human toll of imperial extravagance. However, ancient historians appeared more interested in Sporus as a symbol of imperial corruption rather than as a human being. What makes his story so deeply unsettling is not only the cruelty he suffered, but also how he was methodically deprived of identity and autonomy the moment Nero decided he bore a resemblance to Papia Sabina. From that point on, Sporus ceased to exist as an individual and became nothing more than a blank slate for the emperor's twisted desires. The fact that Sporus chose death instead of enduring further humiliation indicates that some flicker of his true self survived beneath the layers of imposed femininity and imperial manipulation. His suicide was both a heartbreaking tragedy and a final act of resistance, a refusal to endure any more degradation, even if it meant losing his life. Perhaps the most sorrowful part of his tale is how little we know about Sporus before his transformation. What were his dreams and aspirations? What did he hope to achieve? All of that vanished when he became Nero's living doll, replaced by a facade so complete that his original self was completely lost. The boy forced into the guise of an empress who suffered years of mental and physical torment, and who ultimately chose death over further dishonor, demands our remembrance. Sporus should be remembered not merely as a historical oddity from ancient Rome, but as a symbol of both human cruelty and the strength to endure. By opting for his own death, Sporus took back the one thing he had been denied during his adult years, the ability to decide his own destiny. His story shows us that beyond every grand tale of imperial power lie personal accounts of pain and perseverance that merit our focus and empathy, even across the immense span of 2,000 years.